Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. What will be the likely impact of the lockdown in Maharashtra on the state's economy? And what is going to be the likely impact of the huge surge in coronavirus cases on the Indian economy? Those are the two twin issues I shall raise today with one of India's best known industrialists, the co-chairman of Forbes Marshall, the chairman of Aspen India, and the former president of CII, Naushad Forbes. Mr. Forbes, let's start with Maharashtra. After that, I'll widen out and talk about India as a whole. As of yesterday, Wednesday evening, Section 144 applies right across the state. There is a night curfew, and only essential or exempted services are permitted to function between 7 in the morning and 8 in the evening. And this will continue till the 1st of May. Temi, do you believe, given the threat Maharashtra faces from the COVID crisis, this was a wise step?
I think it was an essential step, Karan. I think, none of us like restrictions on activity, on movement. We were all getting back to more and more of a normal life after the great disruption that we faced a year ago when we went into very severe lockdowns. But given the huge increase that we've seen over the last 6 weeks or so, last 2 months really, in the state of Maharashtra, I don't think there was a choice. There was a real need to halt the spread of infection. There was a real need also to address the tremendously overburdened health system, which is now really under strain in all our cities. So we really needed to do something to slow down that spread of infection. And I think on balance, there was a need for restrictions on movement. There was a need for greater social distancing. It should, if you ask me, have actually come in even earlier than it did. But I think the moves that have been taken now are right for the state.
Let's then begin to assess what you believe will be the likely impact on the Maharashtra economy of this lockdown. First, manufacturing units producing essential goods or export-oriented goods are permitted to function up to 100% of their capacity, but other manufacturing units are required to only work up to 50% of their capacity. And it's also suggested that they need to be able to accommodate their workers either on campus or in some sort of isolated facility. Now, is it possible for industry to accommodate their workers at such short notice? And if it's not, then will there not be a direct hit on production?
So some companies can, obviously, the ones that are more remote actually have an advantage because they very often have housing complexes and societies attached to their factories. So those will be able to operate. And I think some of the smaller companies as well have set up dormitories, makeshift dormitories and so on within their facilities, which is a way of having at least a part operation underway. I think do we want any of these restrictions? No, of course we don't want these restrictions. But did we have a choice in the short run? And I think the key thing is that this be something that is in place until the 1st of May. If it's in place until the 1st of May, we think we can manage the best that we can. Go ahead.
Can I interrupt and ask you this?
Sure.
What sort of hit will there be on manufacturing output in Maharashtra, given that other than essential manufacturing units or export-oriented units, everyone else can only work to 50% of capacity? What sort of hit do you imagine?
I think, you could probably look at it in proportion. You could look at it and saying that, look, if you take all the companies that are going to operate within essential services, they will continue operating at 100%. And if you take all the others, if they can only operate at 50% of capacity, their output will be 50% of what it would normally have been. So now, how does that add up in the total? Probably it's somewhere between 80, 90%, something like that, because continuous process industries will keep operating as well together with essential services. All food processing will continue as earlier. Probably somewhere, I would guess that it will have a hit. It will be a substantial hit to total output. maybe 10, 20% of industrial output in Maharashtra will be affected. If I had to guess, that's what I would guess.
Okay. Now, the Economic Times reports one other development that could be worrying. The paper claims yesterday that the state health ministry has issued circulars that all employees of manufacturing units need to get compulsory RT-PCR tests done every 15 days. Now, first of all, is that practical? And secondly, is there the capacity to do this, particularly when there is, in fact, testing being done in a ramped up manner for other reasons?
So the key question is the capacity to test. If we can put in place, and I think it's a matter of a few days, get the capacity to test in place, it actually will protect workplaces and protect the spread of infection within workplaces. I'll give you an illustration of what we found. When this regulation came in, we tested all of our people. We found that there was a big difference between our own members and the contractors that we were currently employing. The contractors, we saw infection rates that were around 15%. For our own people, it was under 5%. Now, if you have a rate of over 15%, that then is an opportunity for the infection to spread from people who clean your facilities, who serve you meals, etc. So I think it's actually the right thing to do. I worry about the capacity issue, though. Because at present,
you're saying this is the right thing to do, but because of capacity issues, it may not be practical. Are you therefore worried? Are you therefore worried this will further retard economic activity?
No, actually, I don't think it will retard economic activity. I think it's causing a lot of struggle for companies to get their people tested. But what they've done also is that they've relaxed the RT-PCR requirement, and they've said that you can also now do antigen testing. That's much easier.
Absolutely.
And as long as we can get the antigen testing in place, right, and have enough of kits available, it's much quicker, it's much easier, and it removes the burden on the system. And then if you get positive results for antigen testing, then you get only those people RT-PCR testing.
Absolutely, I take your point, but all I'm going to point out for the sake of the audience is that antigen tests have a 50% false negative, and that is one of the problems inherent in relying on them. But let's move on to something else. I noticed that, in fact, all shops other than essential shops will be shut till the 1st of May. That means basically food stores, groceries, and maybe pharmacies will be open, nothing else. Secondly, people have been explicitly told to stay at home. Won't this also be a direct hit on consumption and sales in Maharashtra?
It will, in this month, in the month of April, it will be, of course, a hit on the sales of all the goods that we would have otherwise bought in shops in this month. As long as this closure only continues until the 1st of May, though, I think it won't be damaging, because we will simply delay buying that shirt or that TV set or that new whatever by 3 weeks. If it continues beyond the 1st of May, then the consequences could be much greater. But we have to hope that we will be able to control the spread of infection in this time frame.
Well, the truth is we don't know whether it will only last 15 days or longer. But the other thing is that your answer was from the point of view of the consumer. What about from the point of view of the MSMEs and standalone shopkeepers whose business for 15 days is frozen? Now, I don't want to go into details of the 5,500 crore relief package. I'll come to that later. But as far as I can see that package, is there anything at all to help MSMEs and standalone shopkeepers, or do they have to take it on the chin for the next 15 days?
There's nothing in that I've seen to address what small shopkeepers and MSMEs would face in this time period. Again, I think it's a program for a 3-week period. If it is for those 3 weeks, I think MSMEs and shopkeepers will come through it. Yes, there'll be pain in this short run, but as long as it's a short run, I think we'll be okay.
Now, the truth is, it's not just MSMEs and standalone shopkeepers who have to take it on the chin. That, in a sense, is also true of the entertainment industry in Maharashtra, hospitality, hotels, malls, cinema halls. All of them, for the next
Yeah.
15, 16, 17 days, have to take it on the chin. They aren't covered by the relief package either.
But, they've been really hard hit, not just for these next 3 weeks. They've been really hard hit for the last 13 months. If you look at hotels, if you look at airlines, if you look at even some restaurants, all of them have seen revenues drop to well under half of what they were typically enjoying earlier on. So until we have the virus in control, the wider travel and tourism industry will not recover. It will not recover.
But
And
you're saying
that's
something else as well.
our priority.
You're saying
Sorry.
something else as well. You're saying something else as well. These people that we're talking about, entertainment, hospitality, hotels, restaurants, malls, cinema halls, have had a terrible 13 months. Now,
Yes.
just as they began to see signs of some recovery, they're back to where they were, and they must keep their fingers crossed it won't be for more than 15 days. But this is for them particularly bad news.
It's a very tough time for the entire travel and tourism and entertainment business. It's a very tough time. But my view would be that actually going forward over the next 6 months, not just for the 15 days, right? That I think we're going to see continued struggle for the travel, tourism, and entertainment industries, for anything that requires large numbers of people who do not normally intermingle coming together, because we're going to have to see restrictions on them actually coming together for the next 6 months as a country, until we really get on top of the virus.
Which in fact means that this problem is not limited to the next 15 days. It could continue, as you said, for half a year. Let's then at this point,
For this industry, very much so.
let's then at this point talk in some detail about that 5,500 crore relief package. Now, it includes 3 kilograms of wheat and 2 kilograms of rice per person for a month for 7 crore beneficiaries of the food security scheme. Secondly, 1,500 each for 5 lakh hawkers, 12 lakh rickshaw workers, 12 lakh registered construction workers. Thirdly, there's 35 lakh beneficiaries of 5 welfare schemes who will get 1,000 rupees per person. And finally, there's also 2,000 for certain tribal families. Now, as a layman, when I look at this, I get the feeling that from the point of view of protecting the most needy, this is a fairly carefully well thought out, even comprehensive package. Is my initial view mistaken, or would you agree with it?
I agree with it. I think that I think it's, as you know, 85% of employment in our country is informal. And by its very nature, informal employment means that one doesn't have a ready-made means of reaching those 85% of employed people. They're individually employed, as say rickshaw drivers are, or they're employed in very small enterprises, as say small shopkeepers or tea stalls on the side of the road, or hawkers would be. And reaching people like that is a very big challenge. I mean, I really don't know how you go about doing it. And I think it's a very good thing that the government has this time round tried to meet these immediate needs that groups that are really left with nothing, have very little in the way of resource to fall back on, are being given some support to take them through this short period.
Let's then at this point come to what I suppose for many is the key concern: migrant workers. Now, you know, and I know that there are already not just anecdotal stories, but newspaper and television accounts of a large number of workers turning up at railway stations to leave Maharashtra. It's nothing like the flood that happened last year, but clearly there is a danger that this trickle could become a fairly full river. And the question I want to ask is this: will the free Shiv Bhojan Thali scheme and permission for street side food stalls to continue functioning even though people are not permitted to stand and eat there, will those be sufficient to encourage migrant workers to stay on? Or is this an area where the government needs to do more because you simply cannot afford another mass reverse migration?
So those measures in themselves will help, but it won't be enough. I think it depends not only on what the government does, but it depends on what we all say and do as employers. And let me start with larger industry. I think we have a direct responsibility here to send messages to all of our contractors who employ many of the people who are actually people who move to, whether it's Bombay or Pune or Nasik or wherever from, usually neighboring villages or from other parts of the country. We have to send messages saying, look, we're going to keep paying you. We're going to ensure that you're taken care of. Stay here. And I think if we send those messages in a powerful way and we ensure that we're supporting people as much as we can from large industry, that will in itself keep a certain number of people back. It will keep a certain confidence among migrant workers who will hopefully also influence their peers who otherwise would choose to try to head back.
Can I ask you this?
So I think it's a responsibility. I think it's a responsibility that goes beyond government. It was a responsibility that went beyond government last time around, but also this time.
You're making a very good point. It's not just an astute economic point because your industries cannot do without these workers and you cannot afford a second mass reverse migration, but you're also making a moral point. My question is this. How many other industrialists like you are actually willing to act in this way? Are you speaking for yourself or are you aware that there are others in Maharashtra acting similarly?
There are many others acting in a similar way. And I wouldn't make the argument that it's a majority, but there are many others acting in the same way. And I'll make one additional comment. There are more acting in the same way this time round than they were a year ago, because I think many companies saw what happened and how much they struggled to get people to come back to them when they had gone home to their villages. I'll say for our own company, we had no problems getting people who had gone home, right? Because they said, we've got nothing to do, we can't work, but we said, we're paying you, we want you to come back when we can, and we kept in touch with them. They all came back as soon as they possibly could, right? We didn't lose one person.
That's brilliant.
I think companies have learned. I think companies have learned that. I think they've learned that if they want people to be loyal, the companies need to be loyal to them.
Well, I hope so. I hope yours is not a lonely moral voice that recognizes that we are. I hope you're reflective of the majority of Maharashtrian industrialists.
I don't claim to represent Maharashtrian industry, but I can certainly say that I'm not alone in it.
Okay, let's then at this point pull back and look at what impact the lockdown in Maharashtra is likely to have on India's wider economy. Now, as you know, Maharashtra represents roughly 14% of India's GDP. I take it from your earlier answers that we were talking specifically about Maharashtra. If this lockdown only lasts for 15, 16 days till the 1st of May, then the impact on the Indian economy will be fairly slight, maybe more than marginal, but not major. However, if the lockdown continues beyond 15 days into a month or more, and at this moment we just don't know, then would I be right in saying that an impact on 14% of GDP will also become a sizable impact on the Indian economy as a whole?
I have a bigger fear for the wider Indian economy, which is that if I look out a month from now, I think we will see cases in Maharashtra either at least stabilizing and hopefully coming down significantly. I worry about the rest of the country because in the rest of the country, we're seeing cases increase very dramatically. So I think the bigger risk to the economy is what happens with the spread of infection outside of Maharashtra, not just what happens within Maharashtra. Absolutely. I think this is a national problem.
I'll come to that in a big way, because now you're talking about the impact of surging coronavirus cases on the
Yes,
Indian economy as a whole, not just the
yes,
impact of what's
yes.
happening in Maharashtra. But before I come to the bigger issue, let me ask you one more question about Maharashtra. Something like 15 to 20% of urban remittances to rural India go from just Maharashtra alone. In other words, Maharashtra is responsible for something like 1/5 of all urban remittances to rural India. And the Economic Times yesterday reported that already in the last 2 weeks, Maharashtra's remittances to rural India have fallen by 10%. That means over the next 2 weeks, when there's a lockdown, they'll fall further. Won't this also have an adverse impact on demand and consumption in rural India? Last time around, when we had a nationwide lockdown, rural India kept us going. But this time around, this sort of decline in remittances could affect rural India too.
Well, last time round, remittances fell dramatically, and as you know, over about 10 million people migrated back to villages from cities permanently. By the way, yeah, and then it took a long time. It took many months, 6 months, before some started to trickle back again into cities. Uh, this kind of movement of people from either through a loss of earnings or the movement of people back to rural areas is it's bad. It's bad economic news. It's bad in the long run because it directly reduces GDP, it directly reduces earnings, it directly reduces livelihoods for people who are amongst the most vulnerable. We need to figure out how to address this in the long run. We need to figure out some form of health insurance, wage insurance scheme for people who are informally employed in this manner. It's something that we've been working on over the last few months with some NGOs, and we hope that we'll be able to run a pilot among a group of companies fairly soon to provide that form of basic protection for people who are informally employed.
And of course, if a lot of industries like you assure migrant workers that you will continue to pay them, even if your manufacturing units are shut for 2 weeks, and will continue to care for them, if that is actually done, then remittances may not fall very much because people will have the money to remit. Let me now move to the third stage of our discussion. In the first stage, we talked about the impact of the lockdown on Maharashtra's own economy. In the second stage, we talked about the impact of the lockdown in Maharashtra on India's economy. Now I want to come to the third stage and talk about the impact of the huge surge in coronavirus cases on India as a whole. As you know, we are virtually growing at 2 lakh cases a day. 199,000 to be absolutely accurate and precise. And we have no idea when this surge will peak. And then after that, we have no idea how long it will take to come down the other side and end. Does that raise substantial questions about the recovery of the economy and its performance right through this financial year?
So, it does raise questions about how long this surge is going to last and how soon we start seeing cases start to drop. It raises very fundamental questions about the economic recovery. I think we should take some hope from what we saw last year, which is that we saw the economy fall off a cliff in April last year. As you know, GST revenues, for example, in April 2020 was 70% down on the previous year. But if you take 11 months later, in March of 2021, GST revenues were significantly up on what they were the previous year. So we saw the economy drop very substantially. We saw it bounce back as soon as we saw infections and the rate of infection fall. You see this in the country. You see people are just, they cannot wait to get back to as much normalcy as possible. And as a result, I think we've also been behaving rather stupidly in terms of opening maybe too much out, having too many parties and all of this stuff that we should not have had.
What you're saying is, just as we bounced back very quickly after the first surge last year, you're hoping we will bounce back with the same alacrity whenever this second surge, which is almost
Correct.
double as bad as the first ends. However, let me make one further point, and that is this. Of the 5 states that constitute 65% of the present surge in coronavirus cases, they also amount to 36% of GDP. And the Oxford Stringency Index shows that the restrictions on activity are 30% greater this week than they were last week. So even though we may bounce back, and let's hope that is true, at the moment, both of these are going to have a very constraining effect on economic activity and GDP growth.
Very, very much they will. But I worry again, I come back to the same point. I worry about the remaining 64%, because the remaining 64% are going to see increases, and those increases are still to come. And that's what the real danger is, because if those states restrict movement, restrict some activity now, they will probably have to restrict it much less 1 month from now.
In other words, you're saying that those states, i.e. the 64 where the surge is not so worrying as it is in the other 36, should begin restricting activity now. They should begin imposing mini lockdowns now, so they don't have to do it later.
I don't think you need to go the lockdown route. I think what the minimum that one should do is to stop all large gatherings. So, the obvious things, it's absurd that we should see a Kumbh Mela taking place today. It's absurd that we should see election rallies happening in 5 states in the country with rare masks in sight. These are own goals. These are fundamentally wrong things to do.
But can I interrupt? You're making a very valid point that has been made by many commentators, by many doctors, by newspaper editorials. But the truth is, the Kumbh Mela is continuing. It is not stopping. There was a rumor yesterday that the Kumbh Mela may be ended, but it was then officially denied. And as regards rallies, not only are they continuing, but the Prime Minister and the Home Minister, including the Chief Minister, are at the forefront of people holding the rallies. And today's Economic Times has an article about how in the states where the campaigning is over, Kerala, Assam, Pondicherry, Tamil Nadu, in each of those 4 states, the number of cases has increased 3 or 4-fold during the duration of the campaign. So you're making a very valid point, but no one's listening to you.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, when it comes to foolish behavior, we're completely bipartisan.
Okay, at least we're humorous about it, but the truth is, this is such a sorry, tragic story, and the outcome will be not just serious illnesses, but deaths. This is, I'll put it to you more strongly, this is utter unforgivable irresponsibility on the part of our politicians, our Prime Minister, our Home Minister, our Chief Ministers, and I blame all of them, should have themselves said, there will be no Kumbh Mela, there will be no election rallies, we will do it virtually. But they didn't, and they continue, and that has to be just utter irresponsibility.
Absolutely.
Now, let me put this to you. In the present circumstances, what we all look to is effective and rapid vaccination. It is going to be the solution in Maharashtra, it's going to be the solution nationwide, but in Maharashtra, not only do you have continuing allegations of short supply of doses, but now you also have a lockdown. Are you worried that vaccination, which is the only remedy, will actually fall behind?
No, I'm not actually, because, vaccinations have very explicitly and clearly been excluded from any of the restrictions on movement. So actually, people are still free to go and get vaccinated under the existing lockdowns and curfews, right? So it's not something that will actually reduce vaccinations. I think, on the contrary, by the way, that 2 things are going to increase the pace of vaccination. First is the health crisis. We have to look internationally. The 2 countries that did amongst the poorest jobs of handling the pandemic were the US and the UK. They're the 2 countries doing amongst the best jobs of vaccinations these days. Yes. And I think part of the reason is because people saw what was happening around them and said, only vaccinations is going to get us out of this. Now, take as a contrast to that, take Southeast Asia. They did a wonderful job in controlling the spread of the coronavirus. And look at vaccinations. They're struggling to vaccinate people. Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan are struggling to really get their vaccination programs moving along. So I think in India, the fact that we actually are seeing the kind of surge in infections that we are today is going to be a huge boost to the vaccination program, because everyone says, I want the vaccine, I want it now. I think it's a very healthy thing in that sense.
That's a very valid, insightful point you're making. It's a comparison that many others have not made, but I think it's a very interesting one. We're coming to the end of this interview, but I don't want to end without asking you a couple of questions about the central government's vaccination strategy. And I want to begin with a very simple question. When the pandemic began way back last year, and people began talking by April, May, June, that the solution lay in 2-dose vaccinations, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, or whatever. At that point itself, it was crystal clear to everyone that if 75% of the Indian population is to be vaccinated with a 2-dose vaccine, we need 2 billion doses. It was simple mathematics. It didn't require rocket science to calculate. Secondly, at that point again, April, May last year, we knew exactly what was our vaccine producing capacity. And it was way below what was needed to be able to get people vaccinated in a tight time frame. Therefore, my question is simple. Shouldn't the Indian government in May or June or July last year, almost 9-10 months ago, have immediately taken major steps to ramp up vaccine production in India?
So short answer, yes. Yes, we could have done a lot better, but I prefer to talk about what we can do now.
No, hang on. We'll come to that in a moment's time. I'm stopping you. I will come to that in a moment's time, but I think it's important to get clarity on this. If you say the short answer is that the government should have done everything it could to ramp up vaccine production in May, June, July last year, and it didn't, it did absolutely nothing, then would you accept that was also irresponsibility?
Well, yeah, Karan, your word, I'm happy to go along with it.
Okay.
Right? Because I think we could have done a lot better. But I really think that even today, we should look at what we can do to improve things now. And what we can do.
I'm still stopping you.
There's a first thing.
I'm stopping you on purpose. I'm stopping you on purpose because I think before we come to what we can and should do today, there are still two more questions. No, sir, there are still 2 more questions that are important to put to you. And one of them, in a sense, refers to what you wrote about in the Business Standard today. You have a major article on the op-ed page. After the government informed the Serum Institute that we would acquire 100 million doses of Covishield, should we not have immediately placed a firm order and paid for it immediately? Instead, what we're doing is to acquire vaccines in batches of 10 or 11 million at a time. Now, Serum needs a helping hand. This sort of acquisition strategy suggests to me tactical game playing. So is it not another mistake by the government?
I don't think it's tactical. Honestly, I don't think it's tactical game playing. My concern is that there isn't a clear, visible plan of how we are going to vaccinate every adult Indian. And that's what I would like to see. That's what we should have had 6 months ago. That's what I was coming to. And I'm saying if we didn't have it 6 months ago, okay, let's have it today, right? Let's have a plan that's laid out transparently.
One more
and I'm saying, one more question. Place the orders now. Place the orders now for 1.7 billion doses.
And even that is not being done. That's the other thing. But let me put one more question. We have a national crisis on our hands. We do not have enough vaccines, even though the government insists we do. As a result, we cannot vaccinate every adult, even though doctors and health public specialists are saying we should. Serum, in the meantime, has approached the government for 3,000 crore to ramp up its facilities and produce more. At a time of national crisis, one would assume the government should rapidly and readily agree. But 2 weeks and more have passed, and the government still hasn't responded. It's still, in quotes, considering the matter. I mean, once again, isn't it irresponsible to take so long when you face a crisis?
So, I don't know what the government has discussed with Serum, but Serum needs help to ramp up capacity without question. It's our best bet in the immediate term because it's the largest manufacturer, it has the greatest capacity today, and it can expand that capacity more greatly than anyone else can today. So Serum needs whatever help we can, give it to whether it's finance, whether it's equipment, whether it's staff, whatever it might be, to expand capacity. So do other manufacturers. So does Bharat Biotech. So does Dr. Reddy's now with the Sputnik vaccine. So does Zydus Cadila that's developing one. We need all of these vaccines to come on stream as fast as we can. Start with Serum because that's what can help us in May itself. Then move on to all the others. And I think we collectively need to get 7 million doses of vaccines rolling out each day starting early June. That has to be our target. Then we can complete vaccinating every adult in India by October.
And the answer you gave me is crystal clear in terms of what the government should do. Help Serum, help Bharat Biotech, help Dr. Reddy, help anyone and everyone who has the capacity to make vaccines. But when this question is asked, A, there are no ministers at all willing to answer them, not one, absolutely not one. At press conferences, it's fielded either by the secretary or by Dr. Paul, and their answer amounts to the matters under consideration. We will have an answer shortly. It's been given active thought. Now, that is bureaucraties for a non-answer, and yet we have a crisis on our hands. And so I come back again. Would you accept? And I know it's going to be difficult for you to say yes, but I'm still asking the question, would you accept that overall, the central government's vaccination strategy in terms of ensuring we have enough vaccines, helping vaccine manufacturers to ramp up their production, giving them money when they need it, in all three of those respects, our government has behaved irresponsibly?
I think we could have done a lot better than we've done. And I think we can do a lot better than we are doing right now. So I would prefer to phrase it in those terms.
Absolutely. And it is entirely your right and prerogative to choose your language. I know and I accept. I was deliberately pushing you to a position of criticism which you are reluctant, and you have a right to be reluctant to embrace. But I wanted, through my questions, to bring home to the audience the reality, even if it's difficult for you as an industrialist to use the same language as me. I wanted my questions to show to the audience
I agree.
that there is a reality that must be recognized.
Karan, it's not difficult for me as an industrialist to say what I do, but I would rather say things that are helpful, and I would rather say things that are positive and that can point us in the right direction of what we should do as a country. And I think we can do a lot better than we're doing now.
I agree with you. And I think many people should read the article you wrote in the Business Standard, because you make the same point there in emollient and diplomatic language. But the truth is, we need to ask serious questions about the way we have gone about vaccinating, i.e., not actually putting jabs into people's shoulders. That's a wholly different problem. But in terms of ensuring there were enough jabs in the first place, and encouraging our manufacturers to make them, paying them properly for what they made, and assuring them money upfront, rather than talking about buying 100 million, but only acquiring it 10 million at a time. I think people should read your article. I hope also those who listen to this interview will pay heed to the fact that you do believe we have a problem, even if you've expressed it diplomatically. I thank you, Mr. Forbes, for this interview, and I apologize for having pushed you so hard. I was being a naughty journalist, but I think it's important that the message behind my questions went through. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Take care, stay safe, and be careful. You're in Pune, which is not a city at the moment to let your guard down in.
Well, my message would be, whichever city you're in India, right? It's coming. Be careful yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.